Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are back with Rebecca for our Ask the Expert series. We want to say thank you to Rebecca for always being here for us, and we love your words of encouragement and all the information you provide us. It's very helpful during this time. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share and connect with more people during this time. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some de-escalation techniques and some ways to help prevent some maladaptive behaviors. And what I'm going to go over with you has been adapted from the Safety Care Training Manual. I am a certified safety care instructor, and safety care is a de-escalation and physical management curriculum for students or children who are experiencing significant maladaptive behaviors where we as the adults might need to physically put our hands on them to help keep them safe. But what I'm going to go over today is all of the steps that we are going to do before that to hopefully avoid any of those situations and prevent them from escalating if they've started. So the first thing that we need to talk about is kind of understanding why challenging behaviors occur. And anyone familiar with ABA at all will have heard the ABCs of behavior, but this is true for all human behavior. Every behavior always has an antecedent. Something before kind of sparks that behavior to occur. So we really want to look at what's going on before. What are we doing that we can prevent some of these behaviors from occurring by changing the before? The behavior is what the person is actually doing. What are we looking at? Is the behavior crying, whining, throwing things? What does that behavior look like? How can we describe it? And the consequences. What happens after the behavior? Consequences don't have to be bad. Consequences is just what happens after the behavior. So while today we're going to talk about behaviors in terms of maladaptive types, the past 2 weeks we've talked about behaviors as positive behaviors, things that we want to see and continue. So either way, the consequence, whatever happens after, is what causes that behavior to continue. Something that we will talk a lot about, and that comes up so much in everyday life, is what's called the behavioral trap. And it's the way that we react to challenging behavior, which actually ends up causing that behavior to continue and to happen more in the future. For example, it's something that we might do to stop a behavior from happening in the moment. So think about your child asking for candy. No, sorry, bud, you can't have candy. Child starts to scream, but I want candy, I want candy. No, it's not time for candy, we haven't had dinner yet. Then the child throws themselves on the floor, starts kicking and screaming and banging their fists. And you say, oh, okay, fine, here, have a piece of candy as long as you stop. So right now, that problem has been solved. Right now, child has stopped screaming. You can go back to cooking dinner. They're happy. But what's going to happen next time the child asks for candy and you say no? That same thing is going to happen. Those behaviors are going to occur again. You're likely to give in and give that candy, and that's going to keep on happening. So even though we're solving the problem in the moment, in the long term, it's going to make things much worse and keep those behaviors going. So that's what we're going to try to avoid. Before we go into some strategies on how to reduce maladaptive behaviors or lessen them when they've started, I want to talk a little bit about what we can do in our environment to prevent those behaviors from happening in the first place. So what we want to set up in our homes are supportive physical environments for our children and adults with special needs. We want to make sure that their basic needs are met. Now, it's so hard. There's no schedules, there's no routines. And I know personally for myself, it'll be 2 o'clock and I'll realize that I haven't had any water, only coffee all day, and have only had a Pop-Tart, nothing healthy, nothing nutritious, because the day has gotten away. So we want to make sure that we're setting up schedules for ourselves, things like that, to make sure our basic needs are being met. Maintaining a regular sleep habit. Again, everyone's staying up later now than they normally would, but really trying to stay on those routines of having normal bedtimes, normal wake up times. We want to try to keep this space that our children are in to be uncluttered, comfortable. Again, not having things all over the counters, all over the house, having toys put away, having their bedrooms clear and free of clutter. We want to make sure that they have enough access to fun and engaging activities. And this was a huge focus of our past 2 weeks of presentations, where we spent the time discussing all of the different things that we can do during this time to make sure the children don't get bored, they have access to different things to do. We also want to make sure that we're giving them some privacy and quiet time when they need it. While this is a great time for families to spend more time together, to be more social, we need to also respect the fact that everyone needs some time to themselves. And if your child is choosing to go to their room, hang out quietly, I think that's okay. We need to give them that time to step away and have time to themselves. And as much as possible, which is difficult right now, we want to minimize stressors as much as possible. So this could be simple things such as irritating noises, unpleasant smells and sounds. For example, if the child hates the sound of the vacuum, maybe instead of right now teaching them to tolerate it, that's the time that we say, okay, why don't you go outside and play while I vacuum? We also want to do the best that we can at this time to create a supportive social environment, which is exceptionally difficult when we are having to socially distance. But we are still able to give our children access to meaningful interactions the best that we can. So first and foremost, those meaningful interactions can be within the house with parents, siblings, other people that are living in the house. Giving them instructions about what to do and who to do it with. So for example, you can say, okay, we are going to now do a puzzle, go get the puzzle and play with your brother. So giving some very specific guidance on how they can socially interact with others. If your child is able to get on Zoom and do calls like this is a great way at this time for them to engage in social interactions. We are providing social skills groups for some of our clients. So if anyone is interested, you can feel free to reach out to me. But there's a lot of different organizations, including What My Goal is doing with those different social groups and activities each day. Definitely take advantage of those. It will just give your children something else to do while engaging with other peers. Some proactive strategies that we can also do to help reduce maladaptive behaviors have a lot to do with our behavior. The adults that are in the house that are interacting with the children day in and day out, more so than ever right now. We want to make sure that we are really trying to keep our interactions as positive as possible. And believe me, I understand. This is stressful. Everyone gets to a point where you have no positivity left. And that's okay. No one's expecting us to be happy, smiling rays of sunshine all the time. But as much as we can, to be positive with our students and our children. They feel what we're putting out. So the more positive we are, the more positive they will be. And we want to communicate respect. I understand this is hard. We don't all like sitting at the table and doing schoolwork from the dining room table for a few hours a day. I get it. I respect that you don't want to do this right now. So teaching how to have them advocate for themselves and respect when our children are saying, I can't do this right now. What we say and how we say it is so important. We want to try to be polite, say please and thank you. We want our children to say it to us, so we should also respect and say it to them. When giving directions, we want to try to not bark or nag orders. So we're not going to say over and over again, go do this, go do this, go do this. It's not pleasant and it can get quite annoying. You want to keep your interactions concise and clear. Make it very clear to your child what you want them to do. Don't give them 4 or 5 step directions if they're not able to follow those normally. And we do want to be very careful with humor. I know personally I can be very sarcastic and like to throw jokes in, but sometimes children don't understand that. And while it helps for the levity of the situation amongst the adults, it might be confusing to a child. We're going to try to use positive, friendly tones and a low, moderate volume. Keep your voice normal, where you would normally have a conversation, to just continue to provide that normalcy. If the child is starting to behave inappropriately, that's when it's the most important to keep our voice neutral, because we, again, want to model how we want our children to act. And if we're remaining calm and neutral, it's more likely that they will bring their temperament down as well. If we start to get very excited and very loud, they're just going to match our tone and match our level of excitement or anger, which is the opposite of what we want to do. So one of the main keys of ABA and working and teaching any child is using reinforcement. But we need to really, really up our reinforcement game right now, because we might need to reinforce behaviors and activities that we haven't had to in a long time, just because life is different right now. So getting up and getting dressed used to be part of your morning routine to get ready for school. But getting up and getting dressed right now doesn't really have the same feeling because you're just coming downstairs. So we might need to reinforce things that used to be done independently, and that's okay. We'll get back to not needing to reinforce them anymore. But now, if we will, there are a few things that we need to look at. We need to make sure, most importantly, that reinforcement is immediate. As soon as your child engages in a behavior that you want to see, we want to reinforce. We want to make sure that reinforcement is distinct and genuine and enthusiastic. What exactly are we reinforcing? What do you specifically like about that behavior? I love how you got dressed so quickly and came down to breakfast without me having to ask you more than once. They know exactly what you are reinforcing, exactly what behavior you're proud of, and what behavior you want to see again. We also need to make sure that the reinforcement that we're giving is preferred. Some students don't like high fives. Some children don't want candy. So you need to make sure that you are giving your child the thing that he or she wants. And as parents, and especially after spending so much time together after the past few weeks, it's probably very easy for you to determine right now those things that you know your child loves and would love to get after doing an activity that you ask them to. But we do also want to make sure that it's varied. Even though they might be loving ice cream right now, that might not be something that they want 12 times a day. Not that you would give it to them that many times a day, but if you would. So making sure that we are varying what we're offering, letting them choose what they get as a reinforcer. Last week, we had talked about using first then boards. So first do this, then you can get this desired reinforcer. So that's a great time to let your children select what they want to earn for doing the things that you want. So let's say we've done all of that, or maybe we forgot because we're human, and we are now in a situation where our child is starting to escalate to a point that could lead to tantrum behavior or other types of maladaptive behavior. Here is when we want to de-escalate. We want to bring that child back down to 0. If the scale 0 to 100, if we're at like a 10 to 20, this is the time that we want to start to de-escalate. The main goal here is to maintain the safety of your child and everyone in the environment. So if your child perhaps throws things or has tantrums that include aggression, This is where we want to de-escalate so that doesn't happen. We want to avoid making the situation any worse or making the person any more agitated. So let's say, for example, your child is getting very agitated about doing their handwriting. The last thing we want to do is continue to yell at them and tell them to keep doing their handwriting. Keep saying, "Why is this so hard? You can do this. Just do it. Just get it done." That's not going to help the situation. At that point, we need to stop what we are doing and stop making the situation any worse. We want to help them decrease and not get to crisis behaviors. And as the child starts to escalate, we want to try to avoid reinforcing any of those escalations. So now is not the time to give that candy after you have said over and over again that you're not getting the candy. That's what we had talked about earlier about that cycle that in the moment makes the behavior stop, but in the long run will continue it. So there's 3 escalation or de-escalation strategies that we're going to talk about that are very helpful to bring these situations down. The first one is called the help strategy. The agitated person may be using their challenging behaviors to express that they want or need something. And often, if you are in the situation with them, you can look at their body language, you can look at the antecedents, you can look at the environment, and perhaps see what it is that your child is communicating with these maladaptive behaviors. For example, if they're doing work and starting to display maladaptive behaviors, you might say to them, say, "I'd like a break." So you are going to cue your child to make a specific request. Ask for something, ask for something to do, ask for help with something. For example, if they are cutting and they're having a difficult time saying on the lines, you can prompt them to say, "Help me cut, please." If your child uses an AAC device, prompt them to use that. If your child uses PECs, prompt them to use their picture. And if your child uses mainly gestures, you can have them gesture or sign for help. We want to allow 5 to 10 seconds after we model the request for help. We want to give them the time to request, give them the time to think about what we're asking them to do, and then repeat your prompt if necessary. If you see that that truly is the situation, truly is what they need, we will prompt again, say, "I would like to take a break." And then as soon as they engage in that behavior, as soon as they ask for the break, even if it's prompted, we are going to honor that. So even though you wanted them to sit down and do their work, if they appropriately asked for a break, we're going to allow them to have that break in the effort to prevent escalation of maladaptive behaviors. Another strategy that we can use is called the prompt strategy. So basically what this says is if the child is starting to engage in a maladaptive behavior, we're going to prompt them to do something that's either incompatible or just a high probability behavior that they would engage in. So an incompatible behavior that we might do is something that the child absolutely cannot do at the same time of the maladaptive behavior. So let's say, for example, your child is at the table screaming. You can say, "Hey, why don't you take a drink of water?" You certainly can't scream when you have a mouthful of water. If your child is walking around the house banging their hands on the wall, you could say, "Hey, buddy, do this." If I'm clapping my hands, I can't be banging my hands on the wall. And as soon as the child engages in the behavior that you've asked them to do, we're going to immediately reinforce and then prompt them to say something like, "Can I take a break?" You can also ask your child to engage in a high probability behavior. This is kind of the best distraction technique. So instead, you can ask your child to do something that they would likely do. So if they are running around the house, you can ask them to come into the kitchen and put away the paper towels, if that's something that they would normally do with no problem. If your child is crying or screaming, but they have some songs they enjoy, you could ask them to sing a song with you. We want to distract, get away from those maladaptive behaviors in any way that we can. And as soon as your child starts to comply with anything that you've asked them to do, no matter how little it is, we want to go back to reinforcement and start fresh. And the last strategy is the simplest yet the hardest. We are just going to wait. We're going to make sure that the environment is safe. If, for example, you have an older child who perhaps tries to attack a younger sibling during a maladaptive behavior, we'll move that younger sibling out of the way. If you were doing schoolwork and there's scissors out, we'll move those out of the way. But we are just going to wait. We're not going to talk to our child. We're not going to give eye contact. We're just going to wait and monitor the situation. And as soon as the child looks like they're starting to calm down, looks like your child is going to be more receptive to you, either providing the help or the prompt strategy, then that's when we will. It's the hardest because as adults and parents, we don't want to just wait. We want to help our children. But for anyone who has ever been in a situation where they've been stressed out, we know sometimes all we need is some quiet. And someone else being there telling you to calm down certainly is not going to help. And someone asking you questions at that moment might not help. So we just want to wait and give the children time to collect themselves before we move on to help or prompt. This all sounds great and beautiful in these beautiful little slides, but it's not always going to work. And in one step, using one of these strategies, we're likely not going to help our children become immediately calm. So we want to think about how to do it in steps. Which one would you do first? Which one would be most effective for your child? Starting with the one that you think would be the best. And there is no necessary order that they have to go in. It's whatever would be the most effective for your child. And if you are trying something and it's not working, move to something else. If you are asking your child to verbally say something and they're not, move to something that you can prompt. Move to something that you can physically help them do. We really want to try to read the child where they are and de-escalate the best that we can. And as always, we want to minimize our words, minimize our talking in these times of escalation, because generally they usually just make the situation worse. And we want to be aware of our own emotional behavior. Again, this was a very stressful time for everyone. Everyone is tired, everyone is stressed, and everyone just wants life to get back to normal. So we are human. So if you have an emotional reaction during your child having a maladaptive behavior, that's fine. We all understand. But to the best that you can, try to remain neutral, try to remain calm, get your child through it. And then if you have to, by all means, go into another room and do what you need to do to then de-escalate yourself. But the calmer we can stay for our children, the quicker we're going to de-escalate their behaviors. All right, so now I want to open up to any specific questions that people might have on how we can, de-escalate some maladaptive behaviors.
I have a question. So how hard would you say it is to break out of the habits that might form because of these behaviors? Saying the candy one. If we keep giving in, and then we say, nope, we're not giving it anymore. How hard is that going to be?
So hard. And there's actually a term for it where it's called an extinction burst. So I can almost guarantee that if you are now trying to break one of those habits of eventually giving in, what you're going to see is your child's behavior is going to actually get much worse before it gets better. Because their history is, okay, I only need to escalate 3 levels, and then mom finally gives in. But now they're going to wonder, all right, well, level 3 didn't work. So now I have to escalate to level 4 and then level 5. And that's when it gets even harder for us to not give in just to make it end. But if you're able to withstand that storm within a very short period of time, you should see that behavior completely stop in the coming days.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yes. So it definitely, guaranteed, it will get worse when you first start it. But if you're able to hold on, it should go away.
Does anybody have any questions? You can write them in the chat also, and we can answer them from there as well. I know you said that there are some other online resources, and we did have a few people join late. If you wanted to just go over those again real quick.
Sure. In the first, I think, set of slides I had sent, the last page had a link to the POAC website, which is Parents of Autistic Children. They are providing, I think, daily social groups. You, obviously, Jenny, are providing the daily social groups, or a few times a week, for the different children, different activities to engage. And through Limitless, we're providing them as well. So if anyone is interested, I'm happy to put you on our emails to get the Zoom links to our groups. We do a yoga group on Mondays. On Tuesdays, we do a drawing group. Thursday mornings is preschool toddler songs and stories. And Friday is our game day. So those are the 4 different activities that we're running weekly. And I'll actually type in my email address into the chat if anybody is interested in those things to reach out.
Okay, so we got a question here. How do you make everyone cooperate with you when you try to ignore a child during a maladaptive behavior?
That is hard, for sure. And it depends on who we're talking about. If it's other children, I would have them leave the room. Give them something else to go do. What we often find are the most difficult, with the best hearts possible, are usually grandma and grandpa, who never want to see their grandchild upset. So either I am happy to send information on this procedure to give some research and understanding as to why we do it and how it will help in the future, but also just expressing that, this is hard for you too. It's hard for you to do it. So you understand how it's hard for someone else to do it, but the ultimate goal is worth it. And really just trying to stress that you're basically walking in to the eye of a tornado with the goal of getting out on the other side.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any other questions, comments? Anybody before we end things? The person to that question said thank you.
You're welcome. I don't see the chat, if that's what
it came in privately on my end.
Oh, okay. Got it.
All right, guys. Well, if there's nothing else, we want to thank you again, Rebecca, so much. These are so informative, and we got this one out on Facebook also, so hopefully some more people will get involved also.
Thanks, Rebecca.
All right, you're welcome. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.